Have you ever felt the unknown lurking in the shadows? These true horror stories will challenge your sense of reality and plunge you into the eerie world of psychological fear. Stay with us as we unfold unsettling tales that will haunt your mind long after the lights go out. This story begins in San Antonio, Texas, during the unnerving quiet of the early pandemic. Back then, I was 18 years old, a high school senior grappling with the surreal changes that had upended everyone's lives. Quarantine had shuttered schools, businesses, and public spaces, creating an eerie stillness that seemed to amplify the unknown. For someone like me, who craved adventure and thrived on exploring the unseen, the world's silence was both a challenge and an invitation. I had always loved urban exploration, venturing into places that carried the weight of mystery and danger, abandoned buildings, shadowy forests, and even the occasional haunted spot whispered about in local legends. My friends thought I was fearless, and maybe they were right. I had faced unsettling encounters before, the strange presence of a vagrant, the unnerving remnants of rituals left behind by cults, and even one terrifying moment when someone pointed a gun at me. But as unnerving as those experiences were, they didn't hold a candle to what I encountered that night in the Optionable Park. It was a Friday night in late spring, and I had been talking to Clarissa, a girl I had a class with before the shutdown. We'd been texting and calling each other for a few weeks, and our connection felt promising, though still fresh. Clarissa was bright, curious, and warm, a stark contrast to the darkness I often sought in my nighttime escapades. Somehow, I convinced her to join me on one of my adventures, despite her initial hesitation. "It'll be fun," I promised. "Just a quick walk through a park. You'll see. It's nothing to be scared of." That night, we met up around 2:30 a.m., and I drove us to Optionable. During the day, the park was a peaceful haven for families and nature lovers. It was known for its scenic trails, meandering creeks, and open spaces perfect for picnics. But at night, it transformed into something entirely different, a place where shadows stretched long and deep, and the dense canopy of trees swallowed even the faintest moonlight. As we arrived, the silence struck me first. There was no hum of distant traffic, no rustling of leaves in the breeze, just an oppressive stillness that seemed to press down on us. Clarissa looked uneasy, and I couldn't blame her. "Are you sure this is safe?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course," I replied, masking my own flicker of unease. "It's just a park." We began our walk, stepping onto the main trail that wound its way through the heart of the park. The gravel crunched softly beneath our feet, and our flashlights cast narrow beams of light that seemed almost swallowed by the darkness. I turned mine off after a few minutes, letting my eyes adjust. Clarissa kept hers on, the faint glow providing a small comfort. As we walked, I tried to lighten the mood, telling her stories about my past explorations, but the silence of the forest was so profound that even my voice felt intrusive. Clarissa clung to my arm, her grip tightening with every step. I could tell she was trying to be brave, but her unease was palpable. 15 minutes into our walk, we reached a fork in the trail. One path continued toward the park's main entrance, while the other veered into the deeper woods. I knew the second trail well. It was less traveled and led back to where my truck was parked, creating a loop. "Let's take this one," I said, gesturing to the darker path. Clarissa hesitated. "Are you sure? It looks creepy." "It's quicker," I assured her. "We'll be back at the truck in no time." Reluctantly, she nodded, and we turned onto the narrower trail. The trees grew denser here, their branches intertwining overhead to form a canopy that blocked out the faint moonlight. The air felt heavier, and the silence seemed even more profound. We had been walking for only a few minutes when we heard it, a faint melodic sound drifting through the trees. It was a flute, its notes soft and haunting, carrying an eerie beauty that felt out of place in the dead of night. "What is that?" Clarissa whispered, her voice trembling. I stopped, straining to listen. The melody was unlike anything I had heard before. It wasn't random or disjointed. It had a rhythm, a cadence, as if someone were playing a deliberate piece of music. But who would be playing a flute in the middle of the woods at 3 a.m.? "I don't know," I admitted, my unease growing. The sound grew louder, closer, as if it were moving toward us. I glanced at Clarissa, her face pale in the dim light. She began to mutter a prayer under her breath, her fear palpable. "We should go back," she said, her voice cracking. I nodded, though I wasn't sure which direction was safer. We turned around, heading back toward the main trail. But the flute's melody followed us, weaving through the trees like a ghostly thread. The sound wasn't just audible, it was tangible, wrapping around us and pressing against our senses. Suddenly, the underbrush ahead of us erupted in a violent rustling. Something large dashed across the path, its movement so swift and silent that I barely registered it. I couldn't make out its shape, but I felt its presence. A heavy, oppressive energy that sent a jolt of fear through me. "What was that?" Clarissa gasped, her voice rising in panic. "I don't know," I said, my heart pounding. "Probably an animal." But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. There had been no sound of retreating footsteps, no crashing through the undergrowth. It was as if whatever had crossed our path had simply vanished. "We need to get out of here," Clarissa said, her voice trembling. I grabbed her hand, and we turned back toward the fork in the trail, but the flute's haunting melody resumed, louder and more insistent than before. It felt almost mocking, as if whoever or whatever was playing it was toying with us. We quickened our pace, breaking into a light jog. The forest seemed to close in around us, its shadows shifting and twisting as if alive. The flute's notes grew sharper, more frantic, their rhythm erratic and jarring. My chest tightened with a mix of fear and adrenaline, and I could feel Clarissa trembling beside me. Finally, we reached the main trail and broke into a full sprint. The truck wasn't far now, but as we ran, the flute's melody shifted again, becoming a cacophony of sound that seemed to pierce through my very soul. It was disorienting, maddening, and I felt as though the forest itself were conspiring to keep us there. When we reached the truck, I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking uncontrollably. Clarissa climbed into the passenger seat, her face streaked with tears. I started the engine and sped away, not daring to look back. The drive home was silent, both of us too shaken to speak. The flute's haunting melody echoed in my mind, a chilling reminder of the night's events. When I finally dropped Clarissa off, she turned to me, her eyes wide with fear. "What do you think that was?" she asked. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But I don't think it was something we were meant to understand." The next day, I searched online for any explanations, stories, reports, anything that might shed light on what we had experienced. I found accounts of ghostly encounters, strange sounds, and even rumors of cult activity in the park. But none of them mentioned a flute. To this day, I still explore eerie places, but I've never gone back to Opschnabel at night. The memory of that flute, its haunting melody weaving through the darkness, is enough to keep me away. If this haunting tale captivated you, don't forget to like this video and share it with your friends. Let's see who dares to explore the unknown next. Our next tale unfolds in a silent hospital in northwest Alabama, where the stillness of the night shift created a breeding ground for unease. I worked as a pharmacy technician, often pulling late hours from 6 p.m. to 4 a.m. Nights at the hospital had their own rhythm, a mix of quiet tasks and sudden bursts of urgency. But this night was different. It was a night when exhaustion blurred the edges of reality, leaving me questioning what I had seen. It was my 6th consecutive night working, and I hadn't slept well in days. My schedule was relentless, 7 days on, followed by 7 days off. The stretch of work days often left me teetering on the edge of exhaustion. Still, I managed to stay focused, keeping my earbuds in and letting music drown out the faint hum of the hospital. I began my shift as usual, restocking medications in the surgery wing. The air was cold, and the fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly. I moved between the rooms, pushing my cart and organizing supplies. Everything felt routine until I heard a sound that broke the monotony, a faint squeal of a door hinge. I turned around instinctively, expecting to see someone entering the room, but there was no one. Shrugging it off, I went back to my task. Maybe someone had peeked in and decided to leave, or maybe my tired mind was playing tricks on me. Minutes later, as I entered another surgery room, I noticed the lights were off. I flipped the switch and froze. By the medical disposal bin, a shadowy figure was hunched over, rummaging through its contents. My heart skipped a beat. "Hey!" I called out, my voice steady but firm. The figure didn't move. I stepped closer, my pulse quickening. Just as I was about to reach for the light switch, the figure vanished. The room was empty, the bin undisturbed. My breath caught in my throat as I tried to process what I had just seen. I backed out of the room, my mind racing. Was it exhaustion? A trick of the light? I told myself it must have been my imagination, a side effect of too many hours without sleep. But the unease lingered. As the hours ticked by, the hospital seemed to grow quieter. Around 2 a.m., I began the nightly delivery of patient-specific medications to the nurses' stations. The hospital was divided into wings, each with its own set of rooms and hallways. The 5th floor was particularly eerie that night, as one of its wings, the 5455 side, was undergoing renovations. It was empty, a stretch of silent, unoccupied rooms that felt unnervingly desolate. After delivering medications to the 5152 side, I decided to check out the renovations. My curiosity got the better of me, even though the thought of walking through an empty hospital wing made my skin crawl. The 5455 wing was silent, its long corridor bathed in dim light. Doors to patient rooms were ajar, revealing empty beds and untouched monitors. The air felt heavier here, as if the very atmosphere was pressing down on me. As I walked, a faint rattling sound stopped me in my tracks. It came from one of the rooms. 5512. I hesitated before stepping inside. In the corner of the room, an old man sat on the bed, shaking violently. His body convulsed as if in a seizure, his head jerking from side to side. Blood trickled from his eyes, nose, and mouth, staining the pristine sheets beneath him. The monitor beside him beeped frantically, its alarm piercing the silence. My stomach churned. Instinct took over, and I stepped back, preparing to call for help. But when I turned back to the bed, the man was gone. The sheets were clean, the monitor silent. The room looked untouched, as if no one had been there in days. I stumbled out of the room, my mind racing. Was I hallucinating? Was this the result of too many sleepless nights? I didn't have time to dwell on it. I needed to get back to the pharmacy. As I reached the elevators, the doors slid open and a man stepped out. My heart stopped. It was the same old man I had just seen convulsing in the room. He wore a security uniform, his hospital badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He smiled at me, a cold, unsettling smile, and patted my shoulder as he walked past me. I turned to watch him go, but when the elevator doors closed and I called it back, it returned empty. My knees felt weak as I stepped into the elevator, desperate to get back to the safety of the pharmacy. Back in the pharmacy, I tried to steady my breathing. My rational mind clung to one explanation: hallucination. I Googled the effects of sleep deprivation and found that hallucinations were common after 30 to 48 hours without rest. But this didn't feel like a hallucination. It felt real. Too real. As the first rays of dawn crept through the hospital windows, I finally clocked out. My wife came to pick me up, and as we drove home, I glanced back at the building. In one of the fifth-floor windows, I saw him again, the old man, staring down at me with that same eerie smile. I didn't say anything to my wife, unsure if she would believe me or if I even believed myself. That night left me with more questions than answers, and to this day, I can't shake the memory of his smile. What do you think really happened? Was it sleep deprivation or something more sinister? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your theories. The final story takes us to a quiet suburban neighborhood where the familiar comfort of home turns into an unsettling experience that leaves a lasting scar. My boyfriend, M, was away for the weekend, attending a bachelor party in Las Vegas. His house, small but cozy, was in a peaceful neighborhood. The curved street offered an unusual level of privacy, with no neighboring houses directly facing ours. It was a safe place, or so I thought. The weekend started uneventfully. On Friday night, I invited a few friends over for a wine and movie night. We laughed, shared stories, and decided to watch some scary films to set the mood. The atmosphere was lighthearted until the doorbell rang. We froze. It wasn't just the timing, late at night during a scary movie. It was the eerie stillness outside that made the sound feel intrusive. I walked cautiously to the door, peeking through the small glass panel at the top. No one was there. "There's no one outside," I said, trying to dismiss the unease creeping into my voice. My friends exchanged nervous glances, but we brushed it off as a prank. After all, the cars in the driveway clearly signaled someone was home. Once everyone left, I locked the doors and went to bed, dismissing the incident. But at 1 a.m., the doorbell rang again, twice this time. My heart pounded as I sat up in bed. Moments later, I heard heavy knocks at the door, deliberate and loud. I grabbed my phone and called M. His voice was muffled by the noise of the bar he was in, but he managed to hear me. "Stay in the bedroom. Don't open the door for anyone," he said, trying to reassure me. I ended the call and sat in the silence of my room, hoping whoever was outside would leave. Then came the sound that made my blood run cold, a faint clicking noise, moving steadily around the house. It stopped just outside my bedroom window. A deep, calm voice called out, "Hey, is anyone home? I need help." The blinds were drawn, and I couldn't see who was outside. My breath caught in my throat as I stayed frozen, praying the person would leave. Instead, there was another knock, harder this time. "I know you're in there," the voice said. Panic surged through me. Whispering into the phone, I called the police and explained the situation. They assured me officers were on their way. Every second felt like an eternity as I waited. When the police arrived, I felt a fleeting sense of relief. 2 officers searched the property, but found no signs of anyone. One officer, noticeably dismissive, suggested it might have been a prank or a misunderstanding. His demeanor did little to calm my nerves. After they left, I locked every door and window and tried to sleep. But my mind replayed the events, and the voice outside echoed in my head. The next night, I attended a Halloween party at a friend's house. The lively atmosphere was a welcome distraction, and for a few hours, I managed to push the previous night's events to the back of my mind. But as the night wound down and I returned home, the unease crept back in. The house felt colder than usual. As I set my things down, I noticed a draft coming from the living room. One of the windows was open. My stomach knotted as I closed it, trying to recall if I had left it that way. I moved to the bathroom, washed my face, and brushed my teeth, trying to shake off the sense of dread. When I stepped back into the hallway, I noticed something that made my heart stop. The basement door was wide open. It had been closed earlier. I was certain of it. The faint clicking noise returned, emanating from the darkness below. My hands trembled as I stood at the top of the stairs, staring into the pitch-black basement. The clicking stopped, replaced by a voice that sent chills down my spine. "You're finally home," it said. I slammed the basement door shut and bolted out of the house, dialing the police again as I ran to my neighbor's door. They let me in, and I waited there until the officers arrived. This time they searched the house thoroughly. Every room, every corner, even the basement. Once again they found nothing. No sign of forced entry. No evidence of anyone hiding. I packed a bag that night and stayed with my sister until M returned from his trip. For weeks afterward, I refused to stay alone in the house. The memory of that voice, the way it seemed to mock my fear, haunted me. Even now, I double-check every window and lock before going to bed. The house, once a sanctuary, feels different, like a space where the line between safety and danger has been blurred forever. Did this story leave you shaken? Don't miss more chilling tales like this one. Subscribe to Nightmare Narratives and hit the notification bell to stay updated on the next spine-tingling story.